And thank you, everyone, for making some time and joining us today for Direct Online Marketing's latest installment in our educational webinar series. Today is in-house versus agency partner. Which digital marketing solution is right for you? We're excited that you're here. A bit of housekeeping. We are very excited and we love engaging with our audience and talking through personalized questions. We really encourage you throughout the presentation to provide those. And you can do so at the bottom of the Zoom screen. There's a Q&A button. Please submit your questions. I will do my best to reach every single question received and make sure that I'm parlaying those to Justin so that we can get all your questions answered. And a little bit about Justin Seibert, our presenter today. He is the president of Direct Online Marketing, and as an agency, Direct Online Marketing is a top 200 premier Google partner. We've helped clients on every populated continent grow their businesses through digital advertising and marketing services since 2006. Justin, he's actually been named among the top 25 most influential experts in search and has spoken at conferences throughout the world on the subject. He's been featured in publications like Advertising Age, Search Engine Strategies, and La Voz del Interior. And he also serves on the District Export Council for West Virginia and has received numerous accolades from the U.S. Commercial Service and the West Virginia Small Business Association. Thank you very much again. And without further ado, Justin Seibert.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke. If you're like me, when you really want to get to the truth of the matter, when you want to get to the crux of the issue, a lot of times you need to turn to a second voice, somebody you trust. And when I'm in that situation, I'm going to turn to the mirror, right? And I'm going to say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the dumbest of them all? And without fail, the mirror always turns back to me and says, of course you are, Justin. I've been doing digital marketing for 19 years now, and I started this agency 14 years ago. And every year, I look back and say, I can't believe how dumb you were last year, because I'm constantly trying out new things. I'm constantly failing, and I'm trying to learn and try to do everything just a little bit better personally, do it professionally, do it for my agency. So I've learned a lot, and my goal here today is to pass that expertise, or at least the things that I've learned to do or not to do by way of failing, on to you, specifically within the realm of digital marketing and choosing how do you form the right team to do this? Is this something you should do in-house, or is this something that maybe you want to partner with an outside agency for? Now, I know that talking about how stupid I am is not a great way to earn your trust at the beginning of a webinar. So Luke shared some of the accolades, some of the things that we've done. I've won awards for digital marketing, for exporting, for entrepreneurship. But really what's more important to me, understand what the agency's about and what we've been able to accomplish, working with clients all over the world, being one of Google's top 200 premier partners. And to understand who we work with, we've worked with some small businesses, we've worked with big corporations, but for the most part, we worked with medium-sized entities or a startup that has gained some sort of funding. And usually they are very specific to their niche. If you aren't familiar with their niche, you haven't heard of them before, if you are familiar with their niche, you probably know them because they're usually the leader or they're the challenger brand in that case. And not going to go through a bunch of stats, but just understand who we are. All of our contracts are month to month. Our clients are never tied into everything. But having said that, even though they can get out at any time, clients stick with us about 85% of the time. We have an 85% client retention rate when industry average is about 30%. So we've had some success. If you're into net promoter scores, our current net promoter score is 81%. You can see some of the results that we've had for clients, because at the end of the day, you have to be able to move the needle for them. But I would encourage, if you do want to learn anything more about us, go check out our reviews on Google, but especially on G2 and on Clutch. There you can see, in our clients' own words, in great detail, what do they like working about us? What do they not like working about us? And you can learn more. All right, now that was the obligatory stuff about us I had to get through. Let's jump into the meat and potatoes of the webinar. And just a reminder, as Luke has mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, please ask questions. You can use the chat at any time. Luke is going to collect those. If it's something that I mumbled my words, or my internet cut out, or it was just a little bit more information that I can address right then and there, I'm going to address it then and there. If it's something that's a little bit meatier, we're going to save it towards the end, and I'll make sure that I answer those questions at the end of the webinar. I prefer typically to take questions throughout. I think it keeps it more interactive. Just haven't found the right way to do that very effectively with a webinar yet versus in person. And hopefully we'll be able to have those in-person conferences and meetings again here in the near future. So to set the table first, we want to talk about what's really important, what's going to drive digital marketing success. So I just want to spend a couple minutes on this, and then we're going to dive into the heart of everything, because we have to understand what's important for success before we can start asking the questions that are going to help us understand what's the right decision for us to get that help that we need. So the first thing is you have to understand your goals. And what's really, really important, a lot of times people get stuck in metrics that aren't so important. And they're saying, well, when I ask them, what do you want to achieve? They say things like, oh, I want to get more Facebook likes, or I want to drive more traffic, or things along those lines. And those are all really important. We do need to understand those things. We need to understand those as intermediary efforts. But at the end of the day, what's actually driving your business forward? And that's usually a sale or revenue of some sort, or something very close to it, such as a lead and the quality of those leads. So make sure that they all tie in together, because you can't take an Instagram like down to the bank. They're not going to cash that for you. But the good news is you can measure everything. It's the reason I fell in love with digital marketing so long ago. Now, beyond that, once you've set your goals, like to think about having a seat. This is the way I remember what's important. And if you take care of these 4 things, you're on your way to success. So that's setting a strategy. How do you execute on that strategy? What can you do to analyze the situation? And what can you be testing? So when you start with your strategy, you're going to start by having your goals in place that we already talked about. And there's a few things you want to understand, like who your audience is, what geography you're trying to reach, who are your competitors. With your competitors, think about not just who are your direct competitors that you would think of in the business sense, but who are the competitors either directly or tangentially that maybe you don't think of in terms of who do you compete against when you're having an RFP out or something like that, but are your competitors in the digital space. If they're ranking ahead of you on important keywords, for example, they're your competition. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time on this as well, understanding which tactics you want to go after, because that's going to have a huge impact on deciding what that team is that you want to build internally or externally. And finally, what can you test? Now, strategy is great, but strategy doesn't actually do anything for you without great execution. So you have to understand, what can you do? What are the processes you need to put in place? What are the people that you need to build those out? Understand that that's really important, regardless of any plans you put together, which are important. I'm a huge fan of process. I learned that the hard way. Again, one of the ways that the School of Hard Knocks beat me up a little bit. Process is incredibly important, but you have to be able to execute on it. And then again, one of the reasons, like I said, I fell in love with digital marketing when I started 19 years ago is because you can analyze everything. You can dig in and see what the metrics are. So I'm going to encourage you to analyze this and analyze that while you're at it. And finally, testing. Digital marketing has so many different things that you can test, down from the color of a button to the user experience when a person hits your website, to the type of traffic you're sending and who that audience is or what that keyword is. You can always, always, always be testing and trying something new. The worst thing you can do is become complacent. So make sure that you have everything else in place, part of your strategy, part of your plans that you have carrying out, depending on your size, depending on the tactic, whether it's monthly, whether it's weekly, whether it's quarterly, you need to have those tests in place so you can constantly be learning. If you're not doing those tests, you're going to leave a lot of money on the table. Now, that out of the way, let's go in and talk about what are the things you need to look at. And we're going to start with what are the pros. And I could have done cons, but I want to be positive about this. So we'll talk about the pros from both perspectives. So from an in-house perspective, you're going to get a lot more hours worked. Anybody that you have working for you is going to be working somewhere between, assuming they're a full-time person, 25 to 60 plus hours per week, depending on how hardcore you are at your office. And the reason I say 25, there's obviously meetings, there's other things that they need to be working on that aren't going directly towards execution or setting strategy. But you're going to get a lot of those hours from that in-house person, more so for the per dollar than you are typically from an agency. And we'll break that down as well. You also have a person that's dedicated, and if you have a great culture and the person's really bought in, they're hopefully eating, sleeping, drinking your company and what you're selling, and they're thinking about it all the time. And agencies care about you as well, but it's not the same thing as being invested where this is your future, this is your livelihood, this is what you're thinking about all the time. Other great part, even with a super reactive agency, it's really easy to get access to people that are within your own company, whether that's if you're already back in your office or hopefully in the future, if you're able to do that again, just tapping on the shoulder, using a company Slack channel, picking up and texting them or calling their office phone or their cell phone. And the expectation is that you're going to be able to get a hold of them very easily. And if you are in that office setting, that you're going to be able to run into them, hopefully, on a regular basis. You also have that subject matter expertise, because if that's what they're living and breathing, and not just in the core part of their job, but what they're hearing about all the time from management, from everybody that's working there, everything they're seeing just through osmosis, they're picking up little subtleties about your business and about your industry. So they're going to understand that in a really core way after they've been there a certain period of time. And then I put this one, in half quotes, and it's this idea of control. And I would say influence is probably a better word, but you have a lot more influence or quasi-control over somebody that's working for you. You have a few more levers that you can pull with them. On the flip side, we'll talk about agencies and what are some of the benefits that you get with working with them. You get strategic expertise. They're working with clients typically across many industries, many different clients. They're seeing many different challenges, so that something that comes up with you, they've probably dealt with something pretty similar in the past, and they're constantly doing continuing education where they're learning more and they're able to apply it. And they have people right next to them that they can always ask, even if that person isn't directly working on your account. They also probably have that tactical knowledge breadth, so that, again, within that tactic and knowing so many different tactics, that if it's not just that person directly, there's multiple people in the agency where they're going to have that expertise on the particular tactics. One thing we're going to talk about here in a little bit more detail once we talk about selecting your team and what your needs are, it's tough for one person to be an expert in a lot of different tactics. There's also the sense of continuity with an agency. And by that I mean, let's say that you have one person on your team that's handling your digital marketing, or one person that's handling an aspect of your digital marketing. What do you do when that person goes on vacation? What do you do if that person is out sick? What do you do if that person leaves or is terminated? You're going to have to scramble for a little bit, and that's going to fall on somebody else's plate or just not get done. Or maybe it's falling on the plate of somebody that doesn't have the expertise or the time to be able to build it out. That's not your problem with an agency. The agency has those, ideally, has those redundancies built into their plan so that they have backups and they can have other people working on your account and able to step in so that you're never at a loss regardless of what's going on their side. And I say cost, and it does depend on the size of the engagement and everything else, but generally speaking, the cost is going to be lower when you're working with an agency versus what you would have for in-house. And we'll talk and we'll do a breakdown of those costs here a little bit later, but you're paying just for a portion of that work from the agency. You're not paying for a full-time person and all their added benefits. And then finally, agency doesn't work, switch them. It's a lot easier to switch an agency, to fire them, to get rid of them, to find another one, than it is to get somebody else replaced from an employee perspective. There are a lot of challenges with that. You've been through that, I'm sure, in your workplace many times. And even if maybe you've done an agency search before, you're working with one, you decide they're no longer working out or they didn't meet your expectations, you probably interviewed a few different agencies before. Maybe there's another one that you liked, and you can go back and work with that agency and not have to start the tedious process of finding one over and over again. And again, I'll just remind everybody before I take a sip of water that if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. And if it is something that makes sense for us to address now, we'll do it. Luke will alert me. Otherwise, we'll do it at the end of the presentation. Now, this is really big and something that you might not want to hear, but I'm here to tell you things that you don't necessarily want to hear. You need to be involved, whether it's you or it's someone else that you're hiring to manage the process, to manage the people. You have to be involved. if you're going to be doing this, whether it's with in-house or whether it's with an agency. If you have a really great agency partner, you might be less involved. If you have, same thing, if you have a really great person in-house that's handling it and that's their role, you might have virtually no involvement. That's even less involvement than you would with an agency. So it depends on what you want your setup to be, but somebody needs to be setting the strategy. And then you need to also have the knowledge to effectively manage. There's too many situations I see where the person doesn't know whether a good job is being done or not. So you need to educate yourself enough to know what's happening and to say that, yes, I'm getting value of this relationship, whether it's an employee or it's an agency. Now, when we think about your needs, the next section that you want to go through is you're thinking through what you want to do. Understand what your short-term goals are versus what your long-term goals are. So are you hiring something for an immediate need? And just let's say that's the case, it's probably faster to hire an agency, even if it's just as a stopgap, than it is to hire an employee if you're doing it right. But long-term, this is really important. You're basing your business around that. That's a little bit of a different story. So also very related to that, how quickly do you need to get there? And how aggressive are you trying to be with this? Are you the joker in the background, breaking the pool cue in half and throwing a one on the ground? Or do you have a little bit more time before you need to expand? And then finally, really think and understand and make sure that you know how important digital marketing is specifically to your overall revenue and operations. If it's taking up a large chunk of that pie, you have to think about things a little bit more seriously, understanding how much it moves the needle for your operation. Now, this is where I might scare you a little bit, but I want to make sure that I'm throwing that cold water in your face, waking you up. What tactics are important to you? What do you want to be able to do? What do you need to do to drive the e-commerce sales, or to drive the leads, or to get the revenue, or to get the person in your physical store? Well, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. We can talk about search, we can talk about social media, email, video, analytics, web development, conversion rate optimization, affiliates, reputation management. These are all things you might want to think about. And again, not everybody necessarily has all the skills to be successful at all these things. In fact, that's really rare. And I want to pull out one example that's the most extreme example, and I want to think about SEO. And I say this as somebody who has built up the department in our agency to be able to do this. And regardless about the number of clients that we have, I have to have a certain number of people within my department just to be able to fill all the types of roles that we need to be successful for our clients. So if SEO is very important to you, it's going to be hard for you to hire just one person that can do everything for you. That's because they need to be able to understand strategy, be able to do analysis, content. And content can take many forms, from writing to imagery to video. How do we optimize that content? How are we doing outreach? What are we doing to get those links built back to our website? And then web development. What changes do we need to make from a technical perspective of our website? That person that's doing technical a lot of times isn't the person that's doing strategy, isn't the person doing content. Again, to do it well, you need to have people that are expert in all of these different areas. So if you, on the other hand, if you're hiring for something like running a Facebook ads campaign, there certainly can be different needs there, different roles that a person can have in that. But if it's not an enormous campaign, a lot of times that can be managed by one person. So just understanding those tactics is going to be really important for you. Budget. With the budget, here are the cost buckets you need to think about. And with agency, there's anywhere between 1 and 3. There's definitely what's in the contract that you're paying for. But there's also what's out of scope. And what I mean by that, it might not be that the agency's nickel and diming you, but it might be that you would say, well, I need this to be done. And that wouldn't necessarily be within the scope. But if you have somebody working there, that you're the boss of, you can say, oh, I need this done, and they just have to go do it. And the third part is sometimes there's hard costs associated as well. This can come in from anything from press submissions to article costs or things along those lines. So sometimes some hard costs. You want to make sure you understand what those are. But the biggest bucket in any type of agency relationship is what's in the contract. In-house, on the other hand, There's a lot of things that maybe hidden's too strong of a word, but that you don't necessarily think about. So you want to make sure you understand all of these. And again, it's not that it's wrong, you just need to understand the full cost of what you're looking at. So there's obviously the salary or salaries of people on your team that you're hiring, you're bringing in or transferring into your department. But on top of that salary, there's what we call the fully loaded rate. What are you paying on taxes on top of that salary? What do you have in terms of insurance costs? What do you have in terms of maybe a 401k match? All of those types of things that go along with it. Even desk costs, computer costs that you're funding. Additional compensation, so anything in terms of bonuses or future raises. It's very important that they have opportunities to grow. We'll talk about that as well. So the training that you have to do to get them up to snuff if they're not already there before they come in, and the continuing education. Even if they are already trained or they already understand their craft very well, there's that time in the beginning of getting them trained up in how you do things and what they can do to learn from you. And then finally, and we don't like thinking about this, but even in companies with really great cultures, it's not like when my grandfather went to DuPont and he was there for 50 years and got the watch. There's a lot more movement these days for a variety of reasons, whether that's on your side or their side or it's mutual. And so does the employee decide that they want to go to Europe, for example, and just live there now? Those things happen. They've happened to me. So understanding what that hiring cost is in terms of what are you doing from a headhunter, or what are you doing from just job advertisements and all the internal time it takes to go through the hiring process, and then you having to go through that again with replacement. Now, with all of that as background, the next two sections we're going to talk about, we're going to start with building a team and what are the things that you need to do and give you some tips and advice on that. And then after we're done with that, we'll go to agency. So starting with building an internal team, like we talked about before, what skill sets do you need? And we talked about this just with the SEO example of what you might need in terms of content versus tech versus everything else. Just understand, all of us, and I'm 100% guilty of this, have this ideal person we're trying to hire, and those unicorns typically don't exist. So what I encourage everybody to do, I think something that's really useful, is that if you really rank what do you need, what's most important to you, and go through the top 3 to 5 to 6 attributes, experiences, skill sets, and rank stack them. And put down what's most important to you, and then understand what's least important to you, or least important to you now. Maybe some of those things near the bottom are things that you could give to somebody else, or you could outsource, or maybe they're things that you're looking that if the person doesn't know now, that's okay, but do they have the capability to grow into it? And that's something that's given me a lot of clarity when we've gone through candidates, and a lot of times that we like, and we're choosing between several really great people. By putting those priorities down, it's really helped us. It's also helped us write our job descriptions and change our job targets when I realized after the fact that I've been a little too aggressive in what I'm looking for and that maybe it just doesn't exist. Now, in terms of hiring, I want to give you a few tips. The first one's about assessments, and we're really, really big on these. And I'm going to talk about 2 different types. The first one being knowledge assessments. And I feel really, really strongly about this. And we don't do it necessarily for all positions, but for all positions on our marketing team, for the people that work for our clients. We do have these knowledge assessments that can be practical information, maybe building out accounts or making changes to it. It might be situational, where we're asking questions, what do you do in this particular circumstance? Can you write up a client response based on this email that you received? Whatever it is, having that kind of knowledge assessment that they're putting together can be really, really helpful. And I will tell you that we're all trying to put our best foot forward, right? I'm trying to think the right way of saying it. And so we're putting down our resume what is accurate, and we're not lying, but we're putting the best spin on it, right? So try to get down to understand what they actually know how to do. And I'll give you examples. We've hired people from other agencies in the past where we understood, or we thought we understood what we were getting, and that because they had worked on accounts, they knew certain things. And then they would get here and we'd find out they don't necessarily know how to do it. It's not the person's fault. They thought they did. We don't know that unless we have really great rigorous testing. And a lot of times, people say that, like, oh, I wish I knew this before. This was something I thought I knew. And then they get here and they're really awesome people and they're able to train up and do it. But we've had other situations where the person looked great on paper and then we get that assessment back, doesn't look so hot. The other one I'll mention, and this is my absolute favorite thing to do, is we have behavioral assessments. The one we like to use is from Predictive Index. And I swear to you, this thing is witchcraft. I have no idea how it works. You send it over to the person in 2 to 5 minutes, they fill it out, and it comes back and it just nails people dead on. I haven't had a situation where they didn't agree with at least 90% of it. And usually when they're with somebody that understands how to read the BI really, the behavioral index very, very well, then they can usually explain it in a nuanced way that the person agrees with. So I would encourage everybody to consider that type of thing. If you use DISC, that's fine, whatever you like to do. But understanding that will help you understand how can the person fit in to the role, or where there might be friction where it's not going to be a great long-term fit for them. Also, very highly encourage you to get work examples. And when you get those work examples, make sure you find out what did they do specifically. So when they say they worked on an account, or they say they built a website, or they say they ran social media, a lot of times it's a collaborative effort, as it should be in many cases. But you want to make sure you understand what did they do specifically on that, so you can get to the heart of what do they understand. Otherwise, you might be bringing them in for something they aren't at the moment qualified to do, and that's not a great situation for either of you. And then finally, I didn't want to make this a big thing with a bunch of just general hiring advice. You all have your own ways of doing things, but I thought it'd be remiss not to talk about making sure that it's a great cultural fit. That's the very first thing that we look at here at DOM. We have a very strict no jerks policy. We say something different internally, but I'll call it no jerks policy here on the webinar. And then making sure that they're as much as you can on role fit as well. And that's something that we've been concentrating on more and more as the years have gone by as well. With that, then we want to look at retention and growth. And you need to be thinking about these things so that it's not just a revolving door, but once you get in somebody really good, how can you make it a great place for them to be beyond just your general culture and give them an opportunity to want to stay? And one of the ways that you can do that is by showing how their success, the things that they're doing, impact the company, and how do they move the needle for it? How can they be bought in because they know they're contributing? Everybody that works at DOM, they understand that they're helping out the client, which helps out their employees, which helps out their communities, and they're also helping out their teammates and the company and our communities and our families and everybody else here, and they understand how they play within the ecosystem and why their role is so important and why we're lucky to have them. As part of that as well, we want to look at what continuing education opportunities there are. And that can be something like sending them off to a conference. A lot of times, again, once COVID is not as much of a concern, we have some ways to battle a little bit better. We're going to get back to conferences at some point. So what are the ways that you can offer that to people if that's something? There's a lot of other ways if you don't want to do that where people can get trained up, but ways that they can further themselves professionally. And you can always tie in things to make sure, like with a conference, it's not just a vacation, by writing down what you learned, sharing that with the team, looking at that information. What kind of growth opportunities can you make for them, both in terms of what they make, in terms of responsibilities they can take on, titles? If you do have a smaller digital marketing department, understanding and articulating to them how they can grow within that. And then finally, this isn't necessarily for everybody. There's some roles where it's not as important, but as much as you can, try to give variety. Again, maybe an analyst doesn't care so much about the variety, but a creative person, a designer, somebody like that probably is. So the more variety that you can give them within their day, the better it is that they're going to find the situation, more likely that they're going to want to stay. Now, you have to educate yourself enough that you're able to judge the effectiveness of the people that are working for you. And I'd say the same thing over for an agency as well. So what skills do you have to grow? I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with people that say, I just don't know how well they're doing. I don't know if I'm getting out of it, because they don't understand it enough, because you have a lot of things that are going on. You have your own responsibilities. But for you to understand what are the metrics you need to be looking at, and for you to be able to monitor that growth, you need to be able to do that so that you can see what kind of value you're getting. And frankly, doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be to talk with the person about, hey, this is an area where we need to see more growth. And they're probably going to appreciate that direction and help them understand what your expectations are and a way for them to improve what they're doing in an area to concentrate on. Now, you also need to make sure that you have a really tight backup plan. Like we talked about before, you don't know what's going to happen with people under your employ. They're going to go on vacation, right? I know that your work is so great that they never want to go to the beach, but people need that mental break. They're going to want to get out. They're going to be sick, or their kids are going to be sick. They're going to need to go out for personal reasons. And separations happen. Again, whether it's termination, whether it's somebody quitting, somebody going on extended leave, these things happen. So you have to have that backup plan in place for how are you going to deal with immediate needs. And that can be something where you outsource. That can be something where you just shift the responsibility to yourself or to someone else on your team. But understand what that plan is so you're not with that oh crap moment trying to figure out when it's the middle of, if you're in e-commerce and it's the middle of the holiday season, what are you going to do when it happens? Because this is the time you make all your money. By the way, I'm sure she would want me to say something, but the people that helped me with graphics, they did not do this. This was just something I thought was stupid and funny. So I put this together. So don't judge the quality of our graphics on this slide, please. And the Alec Baldwin earlier. All right. Now we've gone through this, and again, happy at the end of this presentation to talk through and answer your questions specifically about hiring and tips for having the team in-house. But let's talk about selecting a partner. And so if you're going to go outsource to an agency, I think this is actually the most important thing. Everything here matters, but if you gave me the briefcase question, you put a bunch of gold bars in the briefcase, you sit it down in front of me and said, Justin, you get to walk away with this briefcase tax-free. All you have to do is answer this one question correctly. What's most important in selecting a partner? I would say fit. See, one of the things I'd look at is, does the culture seem like a good fit? And there's a lot of ways you can find that out. Certainly from the people you're talking with, you can ask to speak with other members of the team. You can look at reviews on Glassdoor. You can look at their social media. See if it seems like they share values that you personally find important and that your company finds important. And then people say this all the time, and agencies will say they're trusted partners. I say it myself. I used it in talking with a prospect earlier this morning. But understand, will they be a trusted partner? If you look at reviews, and yes, we've looked at reviews for other agencies and see what's being said. When people are really happy, a lot of times they're using phrases like this. Are they going to be a trusted partner? Are they going to be an extension of my marketing team? Do I have to worry about them, or do I know that stuff is going to get done? Communication, absolutely, absolutely critical. So how often is that going to happen with your agency? Is it scheduled? If so, how frequently is it scheduled? And can you talk to them outside of those set hours that you have for communication? And who is going to be on the person? Is it somebody knowledgeable enough that's going to be able to talk to you about issues that you have? What channels? Do they set up a Slack channel if that's important to you? Can you text them? Can you call them? Can you email them? What are the ways that you can reach people? And what are the ways they can reach you? And reporting. I'm laughing because we had a situation one time where we were hiring, and we were going through a process and talked about what do we do with our clients and talked through a typical client and what the reporting schedule looks like. And I swear to you, the person looked at the woman interviewing him and said, well, what do you do when you have a bad week? And she looked at him and said, well, I'm not sure I understand your question. And it's like, well, where I am, if we have a bad week, we don't send the report. We only send when we have good news to share. So understanding that you're going to have a regular reporting schedule and then it's reporting that you're going to understand is absolutely critical. And then my favorite word, transparency, making sure that both sides know what's going on. The agency needs to tell you what they're doing. They need to explain it in a way that's jargon-free, that you really, really understand it. There's sometimes an agency might act like Oz behind the curtain, and they don't want to share information, whether that's because they're scared that you're going to question them or that you're going to leave them or you're going to take their information and start doing it yourself. You need to be transparent. You need to be vulnerable in any good relationship. And you need to expect that from your partner. Now, as you're aware, this is America's team, Vanderbilt baseball. Everybody roots for them. So if you are in the United States and joining us today, I'm sure you have a poster similar to this on your wall. It's really important to understand who is your team at the agency. So who's your point of contact going to be? Is it going to be a dedicated person, or are you going to get passed around? And how often do they switch? You know, the agency can't guarantee that the person's never going to leave, or that they aren't going to be on vacation, or they're going to get sick or something along those lines, but hopefully they have a backup. And I would just want to understand this. And the reason I say that, I talk with a lot of people who've left agencies, and one of the complaints I hear fairly frequently is they feel like they got passed around a lot, or they're calling us because they had somebody they really liked at the agency before, that person left, and now they don't have anybody they like that's not doing a good job. So understanding too what that transition plan is going to look like if somebody has to leave, but certainly understanding how often it is that teams get passed around as well. Now with operations, you want to understand, I think first, how long has the agency been in business? Because it's tough to get all of your operations, all of your policies, all of your procedures gathered and vetted and tested and tweaked and changed. And they should be tested and tweaked and changed all the time based on ways that you can find to do things in a better, more efficient way. But that doesn't happen overnight. So one of the ways you get a sense for, is at least a possibility that their operations are decent, I think understanding the longevity of that agency. And it's also fair to ask about their process. What are they doing? What kind of protocols do they have in place? What do they do when they onboard you? What do they do after they onboard you? I also understand, do they do everything in-house? So there are a lot of agencies that end up outsourcing this, or using a white labeled service to be able to help with them. And maybe that's okay, maybe that keeps costs down, but just understanding it so that you have the proper expectations, I think, is really important if that matters to you. And where are the places that they're using to outsource. Also understand, what software do they use? Do they have project management software? Do they have something like that in place? And then also, how do they ensure that work is done? And not just done, but done to an acceptable standard. And anybody that you're talking with an agency should be able to answer those questions to your satisfaction. We've talked a lot about strategy already. What I would just encourage everybody to do is to really ask yourself during the sales process, what do you think the agency learned about you? If they're turning around and just giving you a price quote, probably not a lot. So how much is that strategy really solid versus cookie cutter versus custom? And again, for your price point and needs, that may be okay, but you just need to understand what that looks like. So if you are looking for somebody that really, really will understand your needs and is going to put together something custom for you that's going to help you hit your goals and really understands your business, I think just understanding what they've asked during the sales process and how much they feel like they know you is really important. What kind of expertise do they have? So understanding, what do they specialize in? And an agency ought to be able to tell you what they're really, really good in and what they're just okay at. We have those conversations all the time. And sometimes that's okay if you need multiple things. Maybe the one thing they're really good at is the most important. You can work with them on the others. Maybe it's not. Ultimately, I think hiring an agency is one of the circles of Dante's hell. It's really hard. Every agency talks about their agency differently. They have their own different models. I think what you're looking for is just understanding so you can do a comparison of the agencies. Because you want that long-term fit. It's no fun to be going through that, 3 or 6 months after you just started it. Understand what kind of clients do they typically work with. It's really helpful. And where are they most likely to have success? What types of situations, whether it's a goal or whether it's an industry, whatever that would look like. What the current client mix looks like will give you an idea. Also look for credentials, any kinds of badging that they have. And then a really big one is looking at reviews, looking at case studies, looking at testimonials to understand what they've done. If they've been in business for a while, they ought to be able to show you these, a lot of these. Also, you want to look at the contracts and understand what those look like. So how long is it? And for example, we're month to month, I mentioned before, so you can get out at any time. No, we don't want to take anybody's money. We're just here if we can help them make money. But having said that, even with an agency like ours that's month to month, understand that it does take a little bit of time to really see. So as long as they're communicating with you, as long as you're seeing progress, understand that results are not going to be overnight. So just to give you some basic benchmarks, I would say that for a typical, and I'd rather, if you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. So these are just general benchmarks. For a typical case, from a digital advertising perspective, that's about 3 months. And from an SEO perspective, I would recommend 6 months. Now, how do you get out? Is that easy? Is there a penalty? Can you only do it once a year? What does that look like? Are there any hidden fees that you're not prepared for? And what work is required of you? This is a really big thing, and maybe not necessarily in the contract, maybe that's a conversation that you have, but there's a lot of times, and I'll take websites for example, where contract's signed and they believe, the company believes that the website designer, developer is going to take care of everything. The developer thinks that the company is going to take care of content, for example, provide headshots, and that's not part of the scope. And it's not necessarily anybody's problem. I would hope that through the discovery process, all of that would be ironed out, but sometimes there's just miscommunication or whatever. Try to avoid that. Make sure that you get to the bottom of it so that you understand clearly what your expectations are from a time or budget perspective. And do you understand everything in a very clear way? You ought to be able to read the contract and understand it all. You also ought to be able to articulate exactly what you're getting. And how much legalese are they doing? Is it something that you need pages and pages of, that 6-point font terms of service? Or is it something that's just basic on the page and you can say, yes, this makes sense, or no, it doesn't? Now, I have specifically put pricing as my last slide in this section. There's a reason for it. But to start off with, let's talk about pricing models. And so sometimes they're hourly rates, sometimes they're flat fees. If it's an advertising perspective, this is the one I want to talk about. A lot of times it's a percentage of ad spend, and I would encourage you to stay away from this. It used to happen very, very frequently. It's a little bit less frequent. You're seeing more agencies have different models now. But I don't like percentage of ad spend, and I don't like it for 2 reasons. The first is I feel like somebody is always hurt in that relationship. If you're spending a lot of money on ads, then the agency's getting fat off your back without doing a lot of work. If you're spending a small amount of money, it's going to be really tough for that agency to do the work they need to be successful for you and still be profitable. But the real reason, the big reason that I don't like that model is it misaligns your motives and your incentives. So the agency, based on their own incentives, should always be recommending to you that you spend more money because that's how they're going to make money. It's the only way that they're going to make more money. But for us, I don't ever want to put our people in a position that they have to do that, where they're going to make a recommendation to you unless they fully believe it's in your best interest. So again, think about it. It's very common. Just my 2 cents on that situation. You also want to look at the total investment you're making. And I say that you want to look at that in the beginning. It's the first single most important criteria, because if the budgets don't match and they're not in the ballpark, you don't want to waste each other's time, right? You have a lot better things to do. So understanding what those ballparks look in the beginning is really important. But I would argue that after that, if you're within the range, if you're within the realm of possibility, that it then becomes the least important thing out of everything else that we've already covered in this section. And I don't say that from the perspective of what's best for Dom. I say it from the perspective of it's really easy to look at this as a cost versus an investment. And so if you have to spend an extra $500 or $1,000 or $1,500 or whatever that amount is, then the next guy, assuming we're not talking about you have $500, their minimum is $10,000. If you're in that relative range, spending a little bit more, if you believe that they're going to get you a lot more, because the only purpose for doing marketing and advertising is to make more revenue, to make more profit. So if you don't believe that they're going to get you more, you shouldn't spend any money. But if you believe they're going to get you superior results, you don't want to cut yourself off from someone just because they're a little bit more expensive than the next folks. And I say that, by the way, again, without motive. We're kind of middle of the road. So there's a lot of agencies less expensive, a lot more expensive. I'm in on both sides of it. Now, tips for all situations. Everything I'm about to say will be good whether you're hiring in-house or whether you're working with an agency or looking to hire an agency. In terms of communication, have those clearly established goals, understand what your expectations are, and make sure every person, every team member is on the same page. You need to communicate them clearly. And that also includes when they change, because that happens from time to time. So if you're being judged differently by your bosses, make sure you're communicating that out so that everybody's on the same page and everybody's aligning on what's important. And you have to share what's good and what's bad. It has to go from both sides, always what you're seeing. A lot of times the manager of the account thinks that things are going great if you're in a lead generation position, or that your goal is lead generation because your leads are way up. But your sales team would be looking at them and they'd say, well, these are garbage. You know, just a bunch of middle schoolers. You know, they're not looking to buy our B2B SaaS product. You don't know that unless you're communicating with each other. So any way that you can share that, any way you can be transparent and get that information showing off to both sides. A lot of times that means even opening up, showing CRMs, the more effective that everybody can be. We talked a little bit before about educating yourself, understanding how you can hold people accountable, how you can give them good goalposts to go after. So taking the time to educate yourself is really critical. Also give people time to learn. Now you shouldn't have to tell them the same thing over and over again. That's not fair to you. It's not a good use of your time. It's going to get you very frustrated. But understand this person's coming in new, or this team is coming in new. They're not going to understand it as well as you do. It just takes time. And also look for how you can transfer expertise. I would say this is an extremely common problem, or common issue that I see all the time, where there are bottlenecks of this expert holder, this person that's been here forever, this scientist, this doctor, this lawyer, this whoever doesn't have the time. So what are ways that you can make that knowledge transfer easier? Can you do interviews while they're on a commute? Things like that. Now, when you're looking, I highly recommend, there's a pretty common adage to hire slow and fire fast, and I would recommend that. I think all of us have been in those situations, especially if you manage people, where you knew it wasn't right, you knew it wasn't a good fit, manage people or vendors, and you just weren't ready to pull the trigger, and then it became frustrating later on, and you're very upset about it. So I would say give people a real shot. It's not fair to just be off-put by them immediately. You have to be able to train them up. You have to do things on your end to put them in a situation to succeed. But if you're seeing that it's just not getting better, make sure that you understand that. And if you're looking for a general rule of thumb, you know, I think that we know as humans, typically within 90 days, whether something's going to be a fit or not. Understanding of options too. So it's a continuum. You can make changes. You can adjust at any point that you're doing this. You can change back and forth based on needs. So it might be that we talked about that situation, somebody left your agent or left your company, you hire an agency for short term just to fill it in. It might be a situation that makes sense for you. It may be that you outgrow your agency and then it makes more sense for you to bring it in-house. Your needs today are going to be very different than 3 years from now in most cases. So just don't get in the habit of doing things the same way. Always reevaluate and see what you can do differently, what makes sense for you. And then I put together this slide. So I can't remember who submitted it ahead of time, but thank you for submitting ahead of time. So I actually put something together where hopefully I'll answer this. If not, I'm happy to follow up afterwards in the Q&A here. But somebody asked, especially with COVID going on and a lot of times downsizing from companies, what about contractors versus employees? So in trying to compare contractors to in-house, I came up with 4 differences that might make sense for you to think through. So a pro of having a contractor versus an employee, this can be really great for projects. You don't need something long-term. They can help get you off the ground. And then you don't have that continued expectation of work that may no longer be there for them. They can be less expensive. I'll say that. There's some really high-end contractors that have a wealth of experience that have differently hourly amounts. It's not always the case, but in many cases, your overall cost will be less expensive. And a lot of times they're coming and bringing specific expertise that they've been doing this for a long time. And then it's very, very easy to switch. It's harder to fire, at least mentally, emotionally, if not from a legal perspective or an operational perspective. So easy to switch if it doesn't work out. The cons, there's continuity concerns. So again, if you're working with an independent contractor, what happens if they're out, if they're sick, if their workload changes? Those are things that you have a little bit less control of, even if they're working for you full time. And there are those situations where it's not just somebody to do it for a few hours a week, where they're doing this as almost as an employee, but just as an independent contractor. Access a lot of times is harder to get a hold of them. Again, especially if they're not in that full-time position. And they usually, I wouldn't say always, I've known some awesome contractors who've done great, and especially if they're in that full-time position. But a lot of times they're not dedicated to you. They have other concerns that they're looking for. It doesn't mean that it won't do great work. Doesn't mean that they don't care about you, about your goals and everything else, but it is a different relationship than an employee. And then just like it's easy to switch for you, it's easy to switch for them. So if a better opportunity comes along, that's something that can happen as well. So understanding those things, there may be some other ones, but in thinking through this from the question when we got it yesterday or the day before, here's what I came up with. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and mention this offer, and then Luke, if you want to prepare any questions that have come through. I did want to make sure everybody is aware that if you do have any questions or we can help you out in any way, there's a completely no obligation review where reach out, go to this landing page, you can fill out your information. Luke will call you just to get a little bit more information from you. Then we go back, we review it, we do a little bit of research, and we'll come back to you and we'll help you any way that we can. If it seems like a fit, we'll talk about it, but these are the least salesy thing that we do. They're not, there is no sales pitch. If you want to engage in that, we're happy to talk about it. And with that, Luke, I'll turn it over to you to see if we have any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. We have quite a few, and I want to start the first one out, which I think is related to some things you've just recently been discussing. Kind of a multi-part question here. I'm interested in your feedback. It's pertaining to how direct online marketing as a digital agency approaches or charges companies that are looking to sort of educate or level up their in-house talent through training and boot camps and things of that nature. So, digging a little deeper, maybe what is your thought process around that dynamic? Obviously, there's a core question about price, but just thoughts on kind of educations and boot camps leveraging a digital agency for education.
Yeah, so we've done those. We'll continue to do them when they make sense. The majority of the work that we do is on a retainer basis. And again, people can get out at any time. But when they come with that and say, hey, look, Justin, we're just not looking for this long term, but what can you do to kind of train us up? What can you do to get us in a good position to take it off? I love that when people are transparent about it. And so we're happy to put something together and see what makes sense. So everything that we do, whether it's retainer based or whether it's a project based for that type of thing, we're looking at the work that goes into it. So the first thing, we want to make sure that we scope it right. And so we'd have some back and forth and talk about, is this what you're looking for? How many people are training up? What do you need to learn? What is your learning style? All of those types of things that go into it so that we can understand, among other things, what are the hours that we need to put into it to be successful? What are those outcomes that you're looking for? So once we're aligned on scope, that's the first time that we do any pricing. So it actually makes our sales job harder that we don't, I'm not here with the trench coat, open up, hey, which watch do you want to buy? It's something custom for them based on what they're looking for. So it takes us a little bit longer to do that. And we'll put that together. So I'm happy to answer anybody's questions. That might be an offline question if they're interested to look at that. But the high level answer is it's based on scope. And so that price can really vary depending on what they're looking for.
Awesome. Great. The next question is a little ambiguous, but I think it's probably pertaining, I would assume, to in-house rather than agency. The question is, how do we find, as a company, how do we find people to hire? So I'm assuming they're referring to some of those roles that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Thoughts?
Yeah. Hiring can be a very humbling experience, as I'm sure many people are. So I'll start with, I think that the more of a presence you can show and more of a culture that you can show, the easier it's going to be both in finding people or them finding you, or making it more likely that they're going to continue to go through the process. And I say that with a couple of tips in mind or a couple of things to think about in mind. So one of those is, I would say that, I interview everybody we hire. I'm one of the people that interviews them at some point in the stage before we make a hire. And in the last 18 months, last 2 years, I would say that the two questions that we've heard more often than not are about culture and growth. Those seem to be really important to people. Culture maybe a little bit longer than that, maybe the last 3.5 years. Growth in the last 18 months to 2 years are very important. And even right now, I would say, just given the situation, maybe a little bit of stability questions as well. But what are the ways you can do that? What you can show on Glassdoor is really, really critical. If you're not familiar, It's a place where employees can rate what it's like to work there, and Google loves them. And so it's really easy for somebody to find Glassdoor. A lot of times, it might be your second, third, fourth, fifth result on Google when somebody is searching for your name. What you're doing on social media to show what your culture is like, looking at those types of things can really help. Now, beyond that, we've used headhunters. We've reached out to people on LinkedIn ourselves directly. We've done advertising on LinkedIn, on Glassdoor, on Indeed. We've done a lot of different things to try to get people into the pipeline, done a lot of networking. I think networking is a really big one. And then I would say that the success that you're going to have depends on the level of person that you're looking for. So, and I'm going to make some just stereotypical comments here, and these are not hard and fast rules. Let's say you're looking for somebody that's new right out of school. I think those graduating students have been getting savvier to LinkedIn, so you may find them there, but you're less likely to find them there as opposed to a place like Indeed, for example. For somebody that's a little bit more experienced, depending on the particular role, maybe we don't have as much luck on Indeed. We are looking at something like LinkedIn. Glassdoor, I'll tell you, I love it as a review generation. I'll tell you, it's a real mixed bag for us in terms of what we get when we post paid listings there. We've had one or two times where it's been wildly successful, and other times where it hasn't returned, even one or two decent candidates. So long-winded answer, and I apologize, but it's because I don't have any silver bullets. But if you want to have a more specific question, whoever asked that, feel free to follow up.
Awesome. Thanks. This next one kind of alludes to some things you discussed at the beginning of the conversation as well today around setting the right goals. And you talked about KPIs, right? That's an acronym that flies around quite a bit in this industry. The question is pertaining to search engine optimization specifically, right? So can you talk a little bit about, in your opinion, what would be relevant goals, right? Obviously, it's a generalization. There's no real specifics here, but around setting relevant goals that would pertain to a search engine optimization strategy.
Yeah. I think understanding what your overall metrics that are important to the success of your agency is where you always need to start. So Luke, you and I were on a call earlier this morning. We were talking with someone, and the first thing that he brought up was in regards to SEO was in some of his past companies where he's worked, that he was able to generate number one results and able to generate a ton of traffic, but it wasn't the right kind of people coming, and he wasn't able to generate leads or really get any of the business from it, even from the people that were reaching out, because in his particular case, they couldn't afford what he was offering. So understanding what those metrics are, they can vary depending on what cycle your business is in. Are you looking for rapid growth? Are you looking to eat up as much market share as you can? Are you looking to just kind of maintain or be more efficient, and you're in tough times and every dollar needs to stretch a little bit further? So depending on your situation, the specific metric may vary, but I think they always need to revolve around conversions. So whether that's e-commerce conversions and actual revenue you can see right up front, whether that's from leads and then ideally scoring those leads, where are they and what turns out to actually close business, understanding what those are, and then you can tie it back to return on ad spend, or you can tie it back to cost per acquisition. So it should be something around that.
Awesome. This next one here is kind of related, but not, and obviously we've been talking about this for a while now today, but any thoughts in terms of sort of gauging performance on an agency, right? How do you tell? The question is, I don't really know how well of, how good of a job my agency is doing. How do you gauge that? How do I begin to feel like I know that performance is going well or floundering?
Yeah. I'm surprised how often this comes up. So I'm not surprised to get this question here. And maybe I shouldn't say I'm surprised anymore, but I was certainly surprised, earlier in my career. But it makes sense. People have a lot on their plates, and this isn't the core thing that they do. And they're like, I just know that I need it. But then it's tough for you to be really effective with that. So I think that having that dashboard of what are the 2 to 3 metrics, and keep it really simple, maybe 5, no more than 5. What are those key bullet points that you need to understand? And here's the real trick. I think you need to be consistent with those, because if you allow the person or the team or the agency just to cherry pick which stats and to say, hey, this time I want to talk about traffic, this time I want to talk about rankings, this time I'm going to talk about conversions, then what they can do is just choose what looks best. And it doesn't mean they shouldn't call out highlights. They should also call it lowlights. But it doesn't mean they shouldn't call out things to say that they really stood out, that they were anomalies. But if you're not looking at those couple things that are really important to you, which again, at least one or two of them ought to be around conversions, then, and you're not looking at them consistently, then you don't have a real good picture of what's going on.
Absolutely. This next one's sort of interesting, and the question is sort of pertaining to involvement with an agency, right? So it's kind of working off the heels of that last question, which is like, how do I get more involved, right? If I have like an alienated situation where I'm sort of confused around performance, I'm not that involved, maybe I'm a little even detached from who's managing that. How do I become more involved in those conversations? What are some things I can start using to leverage to kind of jump into those conversations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's asking detailed questions. And from my perspective, and some people don't like this, right? And partly because of our society, the way some of us are raised, we don't like to question or we're embarrassed about it. Don't be afraid to be that. I look at it like I'm in kindergarten. Explain it to me like I'm a kindergartner, right? And I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Can you explain that to me in a different way? Can we dive into that a little bit more? Help me understand that. And you should just keep asking questions. How is that? Why is that? Explain that to me so I understand it, until you have a crystal clear understanding of what's going on. And if that takes you half an hour to dig in, then you should. And I would just say it's a warning sign if they can't answer those for you on a granular level. It doesn't mean they necessarily have the answer right off the top of their head. They may have to go back and do a little bit of research depending on what you're asking, but they ought to be able to get there. And if they don't, then I worry that they're either hiding something, or you have somebody that maybe just isn't quite far enough along in their journey that they're able to answer the questions. And if they're not pulling somebody else in to help, should they be working on your account? Again, different people in an agency are working on your account, different aspects, but there ought to be somebody there that can explain them to you so you fully understand everything.
So yeah, that makes sense. Our final question, at least so far, is sort of right in the middle of what we've been talking about so far today. So we're talking like in-house versus agency. What about a hybrid approach? What experiences have you had kind of in the middle between the mustard and the mayonnaise of in-house and agency collaborating, right, to a certain extent, and sort of leveraging both gears to make them work together?
Yeah, it's a great situation. And if you have the budget to be able to do it, that's really common for us with our clients that are a little bit on the larger side of medium or above, where they have those people in house, and they're still looking for an agency to go out and execute on it. So in those situations, maybe the agency isn't working as your everything. Maybe the agency is working just as your SEO team, or just your search team, or just your social team, or just your email team, or whatever it is. But I think that's actually the best result. If you're able to do it, I think the hybrid approach is a really good one.
Awesome. And yeah, as far as I can see, that is it on my end for questions at this point.
Okay, awesome. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out. Appreciate all the questions and listening. And if you have any questions, or we can do anything for you that you don't want to ask on the call today, on the webinar today, please reach out. We'd love to talk with you. And I hope you'll stay in touch and follow us on social media. Thanks, everybody.